I personally never, and this is pretty much the truth, I never touch temp and tint. Whether it's here or whether it's in the HDR tool, I just never have touched it. I've never trusted it, never thought it was the way to go. Always used lift gamma gain. Just to let you all know about the roadmap for the Filmverse plugin. If you go to the website, there's a new page called Project Update. Here, Jai details some of the planned updates. You'll see that there are new film stock implementations and a custom display rendering transform that are under development. These and other features all focused on improving the plugin performance. If you want to grab the plugin at a discounted rate, now's the time to do so. In the description below, you can find links to the festive season discounts and other special offers. Hi there. In this video, we're going to start looking at the look design process and start touching the very interesting topic of film emulation. So let's get into it. As a first concept, I've prepared, because I think there's something else we should talk about first. Often when you're chatting with a client or you're deciding, the process of going into a job, the start, the middle, the beginning, the middle, and the end of the job, the process of getting a job done, from getting the footage to starting to conform and starting to grade and all the stages that you'll go through, finer and finer detail. I really wanted to emphasize this process. You could say that there are very different levels of abstraction that we work at when we're setting the look for a job. When we're doing look design, it's often a good idea to look at a wide range of images. And often what you're doing is you're designing a node tree or a set of effects that are going to be, you're going to use them on many jobs. It's going to become maybe your favorite look. And so it's not just for this job. Maybe it'll be job specific, sure, and you'll tweak it job to job, of course. But as a methodology and as it's almost like you're designing a film stock. It's a digital film stock, obviously, nowadays, but it's a processing pipeline. It's a way of rendering images from raw files to as they're meant to appear on the screen. If you're working at that level, you work very broadly, and you'll work with a range of test images, and you won't be looking at details yet. You'll be working at broad strokes. Let's say that's one level, the film stock level of look design. You're trying to be very general. You're trying to make something that works for many situations, and that's your criteria going in. And now, when it actually comes time to do a job, you've got specific creative requirements. There's a script, there's a brief, there's creative references, there are all these things which drive you in a certain direction. So obviously you can take this film stock or that methodology, but there's strong winds that are blowing you in a certain direction. They're leading you to certain conclusions about the type of look. Again, that's coming down one level to this specific job, and we'll design a look that will get applied over this entire job. I mean, you can split it up, sure, and how you slice and dice what happens on what level is totally up to you. That's the point of this discussion, is it's up to you, and you must think about it. Then within each film, let's say it's a 90-minute film, there are different scenes. And each of these scenes, so you see we're expanding level by level here, we're zooming in. This particular scene will have its specific look. And in other videos, we've spoken about how best to do scene looks and where to place them in your node tree. The night scene, the day scene, office, at the beach, in the desert, post-apocalypse, pre-apocalypse, all those kind of different things that will happen, grading tweaks that need to be scene applied. And then, obviously, one level down, we zoom in again, and then there's shot level adjustments. So balancing of shots is the main thing, and it's general exposure or lift gamma gain adjustments that we're doing to balance the wide shot to the over shoulder close-ups, to the close-up of the hand, and all these things. So we're doing shot matching down at that final level. And then obviously with these amazing tools, I mean, in the film days you couldn't do this level of tweaking, but nowadays it's almost expected that you must do this level of tweaking. You'd isolate a certain area of the frame and make that darker or lighter, or you'd select a specific color, or you'd matte the person's face out and brighten their eyes or soften the skin, or all these things that have become natural now. So that's an even finer level of detail. So my point is that when you're making decisions, or when the client says to you, oh, can you make it bluer? Or, oh, that red is so, let's desaturate all our reds. You need to think, or you need to ask them, you need to have the discussion, what level are you talking to me on? Are you saying that this whole film, I now feel that every shot in this, every red that I see in this whole film is too much and I've got to pull them all down, which means that you might be working on the job or the film stock level, or it's just the scene, or it's just the shot. And once you have that answer, obviously it's not something you can verbalize every time to the cinematographer and the director. They'll think is this person a child? They've got no initiative. It falls on you that you've got to lead that process and work out which level you're working on. But you may, when comments come up, you may need to inquire a little bit more before you make your choices. And then you can implement them at different places in your node tree. Right. So that's just a little bit of what I was getting to with this. So you see all those little details, keying and windows and brightening and darkening certain areas that we might do inside a shot. We'll do shot-to-shot balancing. In our match node, we'll have a scene node or couple of nodes that set look for a scene. We've mentioned day for night and that kind of thing. The whole job will have its look, and then we might be using a particular type of film stock, a digital rendering pipeline, which includes color management. I want to make that very clear. It also includes the color management decisions. So typically if we're working in Resolve, this color space transform, this innocent color space transform that sits there and does a huge amount to the image is actually a critical part of your look. And you have to consider it. Sure, if you're getting into things and I just want, give me color management, do it for me. I don't want to think about it. And you're going to be doing some basic tweaks underneath that, fine, no problem. But if you're going to take further steps into the world of look development and film emulation and all these things, you have to look at the color management, because it's not just a technical decision. There are creative choices, the low light contrast, the top roll off, all these decisions, how as colors get very saturated to the borders of the gamut, how do they get treated? Do they just linearly go out to the maximum and then crash into the boundaries, or do they have some kind of nonlinear roll off? All these decisions will affect your look. So at some point, if you're on Resolve, Baselight, or if you're using ACES, or if you're using some custom design by yourself output transforms, or if you got some other DCTL output transforms that you've downloaded, you're going to have to just get into that and face this question as part of your look design process. All right, so let's get into look design, and we'll talk generally now about some of the components of a standard look. Most commonly, when people talk about looks, they kind of break it into three sections. Now, the order in which these three sections get applied is totally up to you. And especially because we're including the color management in this process, it is implicit that it may not all happen at one stage. But for simplicity, we'll talk about it as three broad sections. The tone curve, and it's often called a 1D curve or tone curve, and it's the general contrast that goes into your show. You could say it's the main part of the look. Sure, if you're just flicking between ungraded and graded, that's the main thing that you'll see is totally flat raw file and with good contrast display rendered file. That would be the main thing you can see. And so obviously it's a critically important aspect. And in a moment we'll look at some options on how to create that. The next section is I call split toning or color washes. Traditionally you might it might be a whole color wash, a move of the color temperature, making the scene warmer or cooler, greener or bluer or whichever to suit the story. Or it might be doing what's called split toning, where the shadows might go in one direction, the highlights might go in another direction, and maybe the mids, which are closely associated with skin tone, will move in another direction. And so they're separate decisions from the 1D tone curve. They can all be done in one node. It's up to you. You can separate it out. You can use the same tool. You can use different tools, and we'll discuss some options. The third section, which is quite a broad section actually, I like to call it the HSL, so hue, saturation, and luminance, very much secondary type of corrections, and also matrix transforms, 3x3 matrix transforms, and things like the RGB mixer. There are a huge range of tools to achieve these three different sections nowadays. But generally speaking, the 1D tone curve and the split tone color washes are achieved by primary tools, just to speak very grossly, and then the HSL and Matrix tools are achieved by a mixture of secondary tools that work in the hue, saturation, and luminance, some type of hue, saturation, and luminance color space, and then Matrix RGB matrix is, well, it could be 3x3 or 3x6 or whatever type of matrix, tetrahedral matrix. And those are rough. I guess you could consider those as primary tools because they do work on the RGB signal. Okay, so let's, with those three sections in mind, I mean, the order in which these are applied, this is totally up to you, and this is part of the look design choices. I normally do my HSL and Matrix first, then I will do my 1D tone curve, and then I will do my split toning and any clips and final tweaks after that. That's mostly how I work, but it might be different for a specific job. I like to keep the choices about my node tree design very fluid and job specific. So there'll be a general thing that is my film stock level design, but when I'm going into a job based on the creative brief, I will structure the node tree accordingly. Okay, so let's first look at the 1D tone curve. If this whole block here is basically my show look, the look for the specific job, this is going to be my output transform, and prior to that is texture and details and things like that. I mean, obviously texture is also a component of this. We will discuss that in later videos, but generally I would take texture and add it prior to the look so that it also goes along for the journey. Anything that you're adding in terms of grain and texture, it also gets the look applied to it. That's my general thinking on it. So when looking at the 1D tone curve, one quite important point is to look at where the mid-gray value is for the particular working space. So in this case, we're in DaVinci wide gamut. And so in our input transform, we've converted from Arilog C4 to DaVinci wide gamut. So all these nodes, all the way through the tree here, everything prior to this output transform where we change over to 709 gamut 2.4 is all in DaVinci wide gamut. So you can look up online. The DaVinci wide gamut mid-gray point is 344 on the 10-bit scale. So you could actually open up your parade scope here and you could mark it off. You could say, I want to show a reference level here. You could tick this and you could say, okay, it's 344. There you go. And this, it would show you on the parade scope nicely this level here. This test chart's been shot very well by Ari, and we're checking, hey, but wait, why is the mid-gray here? It's up above. And then you realize, okay, because I'm actually viewing at the end of the tree here. My scopes and what I'm seeing on the screen is actually at the end, but this node inside DaVinci wide gamut is actually this. I'd actually have to turn off my output transform, and then you'll see that, yeah, it is actually completely well shot. You'll see that this gray patch, even though it does have a slight gradient of brightness across it, it pretty much does sit exactly on that 344 gray level. So you don't have, you know that it hasn't been shot properly, but you do have a gray card. And you'd like to just say, okay, this lighting on this day with this camera, the result that I've been given now, I want to set my gray point to that. One thing that you can do is, just as a very crude but effective way of doing it, is if you go crazy with the contrast, you just max out your contrast. And then you move the pivot point, because this contrast is set to be an S-curve contrast. So we want the middle of that S-curve, where the top roll and the bottom roll meet, to be exactly on our mid-gray point. So now I'm moving the pivot point, and if the pivot point is splitting that mid-gray exactly in half, you'll see that, oh, okay, it actually does. It's like 0.33, pretty much 0.336, that exact value. So yeah, that's another way you could do it. Then you could reset and then, work out how much contrast you want. Another interesting way of doing it is to say, okay, I'm going to look at the face. Obviously, we've got two different skin tones here, so it's a different choice. But let's assume we're looking at this guy's face here. We could do the same thing. We could jack up the contrast. And you can see now that this default of 0.435 is totally wrong. And at the point where we're splitting the light side and the dark side of the face exactly, then we know that, okay, for this skin tone, that's where we'd set our mid-gray, so 0.299 on the 0 to 1 scale. And then if, on a separate shot, if we were doing for this skin tone, it would be somewhere more like here, the point, slightly up, 0.36. So that's quite an interesting way of doing it. This would be my go-to for very simple 1D tone curves over and above what the the 1D tone curve that the display transform is giving you, but we'll go into that on other videos. Let's just take that as given, although that is slightly unwise. Let's work at a simple level where we're just saying we're using basic DaVinci color management and happy with that. So setting our 1D curve is, once we've set our mid-gray point, our pivot point, then the traditional contrast on the primaries palette is a great way to go. Just bear in mind that as you increase, saturation will increase, so you may need to, either on this node or somewhere else in your tree, you might need to reduce saturation. It's just a legacy of how this processing has been done, that the two go hand in hand. So yeah, the contrast and pivot is one way to do it. I mean, I'm quite happy doing it with lift gamma gain, to be honest. You know, taking the lift down, taking the gain up, and then moving the mids around. As long as I have a way to do some roll-offs at the top and bottom, I'm quite happy to build it like this, just because I've had 20-something years of doing it like that on a telecine. So for me, it can be, you know, started with the S contrast and then augmented with lift gamma gain. I'm totally fine with doing that. So I would suggest you experiment with that and see how far it gets you, see what the pros and cons of designing a 1D curve using that. Because it's a 1D curve, we think, oh sure, I should use the curve tools, and that logic is totally fine, totally sound. We could use the picker to say, okay, give me on the gray value, or we could, unfortunately the resolve custom curves gives you no numeric values, so you know you have to resort to this kind of thing, either a generator to generate mid-gray, then pick on it and then deselect the generator, or if you're lucky enough to have a gray card, there you go, there it is. Often when people do this, they say, okay, cool, I've got mid-gray, off to the races, and then they go, okay, below and above, done. One thing to be careful of when you're choosing those points is look at your histograms. Very important. On each of these tools now, you can set your histograms to be either the input or the output. If it's the output, obviously it's going to move. As you change these things, the histogram is going to adjust. So yeah, that's a bit of a moving target. You'll get yourself into a feedback loop there. But if you use input, you at least know where. So mostly in this shot, the bulk, other than these white patches here, his shirt is the really brightest thing. So that's probably what's coming up here in this section. So if say you're in this section of the graph, merrily tweaking away here, and you're wondering, why is I getting no effect? There's nothing there. This is a hugely broad DaVinci wide gamut container, up to 10,000 nits of brightness, and there's no light sources in this shot. We only got reflected light. We do have some speculars in the eyes and on the leaves in the background, but there's nothing in the signal there. So, you know, this is also to do with shot specific versus film stock specific. So if you work at the film stock level, you will test your 1D curve on all sorts of shots. The ones that have got the sun shining directly into the camera, the ones that, you know, pitch black, you'll go through a huge range of source. Here we're saying, this is my shot and I'm setting it for this. So that's another thing to consider, the level of abstraction when designing a look, and how broadly or narrowly it needs to be relevant. Let's be a bit more sane with this, and just bear in mind that it's just about a left, right, and up, down position as to how you're going to design your look. So your 1D tone curve. I mean, this does have the other benefit that you can do other roll-offs all in one. You can design if you want to soften the black, you can design it very nice and smoothly like that. And smooth is the operative word. And you'll see, especially in these areas on the skin, you know, the skin transitioning from the bright side to the dark side and rolling off down here. It's really where you see errors. You know, if you've got slight bends and folds here in your 1D curve on the skin tone, that's where it's really going to break up. So yeah, custom curves is a way that you can definitely do your 1D curve. I am not such good friends with the HDR tool, other than the global exposure I really like, but that's got nothing really to do with a 1D curve. So yeah, I mean, let me know in the comments if you love the HDR tool for 1D tone curve, but you know, it visually, you know, in terms of the graphic overlay that they give you here, cool. This sounds, you know, it's something like you'd really want to do. But in terms of actually designing a look and getting something that's not going to break the image, I'm not on board yet, but happy to be proved wrong. But it's not my go-to for designing a 1D curve. Those would be mostly my basics, with a second layer of detail. If I was going traditionally with this, just an S curve, something like that, I might also, on the same node or on a separate node, and before or after, all makes a difference. So these are choices. I might add a bit of the, I can use the log wheels to roll just the low end in, or the highlights could be rolled in, with those as well. So you have the lift gamma gain for broad adjustments, and then you have the log wheels, the shadow, midtone, and highlights for some finer details. So that is a good way to get started for designing 1D curves. Next, to look at split toning. It's basically everything I've just said, but moving the RGB balance instead of just a so-called monochrome adjustment. So lift gamma gain, custom curves, the log wheels is already a great way to start. With lift gamma gain for split toning, like I say, this is again what I've been doing for years, so this is always my go-to. For example, the traditional cool the shadows, warm the tops, and you can play with a lot more in the mids, a bit less in the whites, and it's really just pushing and pulling to come up with some kind of what you feel could be a pleasing skin tone and suitable for the job. Then a finer detail in on that, you could go into the log wheels and say, okay, that's where I'm going to put an extra push of cyan blue into the blacks, or I'm going to keep my high highlights much cleaner, and remember to always adjust your ranges. These are more precise tools, the log wheels, and they do break the image sometimes, so you've got to be careful. Be careful with these, how much you use and where. But again, they're great, a very robust tool for designing split tones. I personally never, and this is pretty much the truth, I never touch temp and tint. Whether it's here or whether it's in the HDR tool, I just never have touched it. I've never trusted it, never thought it was the way to go. Always used lift gamma gain. For big moves of the entire signal, I might use offset, where you want everything, the top, middle, and bottom, all to go blue, all to go. But often in a split tone, we're doing this. We want the lows to go in a certain direction, we want the highs to go in a certain direction, and the mids to go in a certain direction. So don't even ask me about temp and tint when they get used. I'd never touch them. They always kind of seem to be on the primary palette, but they're definitely not primary adjustments. So I just never touch them. Custom curves is also obviously a great way to do it. On recent films, I've done that. I've done the 1D curve in the custom curves and then the split toning. So here you would have to unlock the three, in Resolve, because we have the separate luminance channel, it's the 4. And you would leave the Y alone now. And then in terms of the red, green, and blue curves, you would put in certain values. So you might have a minus red. If we were going to do that traditional cyany blue in the blacks, it might be minus red, adding a touch of green in the black, and maybe a bit of blue. And then how you work this balance and how you roll it off and where you decide it comes in and comes out. You can add other points. Hold down the Alt key, and you can, narrow all of these in. So yeah, for example, on the green curve, we could have a point below which there's no wash. If we were using this method, we could have a neutralizing point, and the same thing in the top. And remember what I said, there's not much point in doing tweaks up here. Because this section, sure, that's doing something because we have signal to there. But in this section, we've got some little speculars going to there. But from here upwards, we've got nothing. And also, would we want a color wash in something that bright that is actually a specular? So in terms of your highlight, remember to press the Alt key to, you might be doing something more along these lines. Working with these custom curves, because they're hard to control, they don't have numeric values, it's just what Resolve's given us. Remember to do this. Remember to move it out. You can full screen it. You can do your fine tweaks big like this. See, these are very extreme adjustments that I've put in. You can zoom it up to minimize all of this. We want a bit of yellow in the white, so we can add a touch of green. you know, and maybe it's minus blue as well, just to make it more extreme. But okay, bear in mind, we've got to keep with our idea here that by this point, they've got to all taper out. So back to our green curve, and also add the taper point, holding down the Alt, something like that. I mean, I've used this to great effect. Obviously, it needs to be tweaked very carefully as a way to make split toning. Our third section, which is the HSL and Matrix. Now, this is a very broad, especially with the realm of DCTLs and that kind of thing. It's a very wide topic, and many opinions on how to best do it. So what I'm going to talk about now is some very basic, solid methods. And typically, I might separate my node tree out into having some kind of 3x3 matrix, so using the RGB mixer, and it could do something like, well, something very typical, like taking the magenta to green axis. So I will, on the green channel, I might, and remember, you always count how many clicks you go. So I'm coming down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, make it a nice round number, and then I'll add 5 on each. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if the total of these three always adds up back to 1, it means that my white point hasn't moved. So you'll just see that my magenta green axis has now been squashed by that amount, just as a simple example of one thing that you can do with RGB mixer 3x3 matrix. Same thing. Hue, you know, again, I never touch, I hardly ever touch this color warper. I find that most often these traditional tools plus some keys or that mostly get you there. But sure, the color warper does have its applications. I'm just, same with the HDR tool. How easily it breaks the image versus the benefits. I'm still rather cautious in using it. I would normally break it out to, in one particular node, I would do my hue transformations. So, you know, I don't know. I mean, let's be really cliched here. Let's swing let's hone in on some orange for everything. You know, I mean, this is just totally over the top already, but let's squashing in. And if our blues were going to get moved more cyan, whatever. And if our greens were maybe going to turn slightly more or less towards, you know, either a cooler green like that or a warmer green like that, this would be our hue profile. You know, we might also do something with our magentas. Move in. So this would be our hue versus hue. And then we could also do some saturation profiling, either the, you know, specific colors. We could, as I mentioned before, if you wanted to drop the reds or, you know, increase the cyans, we could do specific. I mean, presumably this peak here is this background here, and we could do some specific push on that, or some saturation versus saturation profiling. You could also include that. Another thing here, because this is the area that I'm not going to cover in this video because it goes very deep and wide, is now in Resolve we can jump to other color spaces, and it's quite well known. There are lots of transforms that you can do with flipping into HSL and HSV, especially HSV. You can disable some of the channels and either work on just the hue, just the saturation, or just the luminance, and mostly it's the saturation, and then you can build curves in that other color space, which is also quite dynamic. So all of these would be in the category of HSL and matrix transforms. And in terms of the node tree, I'd always like to put them first so that they're almost on a clean signal, apply those, then apply my 1D tone curve, and then apply my split toning and any, you know, final clips and roll-offs and softening of the blacks and, you know, neutralizing of peak black and peak white. I'd put that downstream. But obviously different for every job, and that's something that you can tweak accordingly. The next section I'd like to talk about is as we slowly move over to film emulation and, like, how do we do it? What's it all about? The one issue that I'd like to point out is that what is the target? What are we moving towards? Is it a feeling that we have in our gut, and then we work towards that feeling? Like, when we emulate film, are we trying to undigitalize? Is that what it's all about? So digital cameras supposedly gives you reality, in quotes. It's sharp, it's clean, it's greens are green, blues are blues, everything's natural as we see it. And we're trying to undo that a bit. Is that what film emulation is about? So we'd want to soften, we'd want to change the sharpness profile, we'd add noise. So digital is trying to be cleaner and cleaner, but we're going to make it actually noisy. We're going to break it down a bit. So these are all decisions. There's no right answer. These are all decisions and questions. But what the target is of a film emulation is a really good question. Like what, and when last did you see a film print? Living in Taiwan or living in South Africa, where I'm from, never in living memory, not for the last 10 years, not for the last 15 years. Maybe if you're in LA or some other big centers that actually have places that actually still project 35mm, then you can go and see what it looks like. And you can have a more concrete visual memory of something that you've actually seen recently on film and see what it looks like. But other than that, we're down to references from other films, looking on ShotDeck, looking on other online resources, looking at Blu-rays, which are already a step away. Could be originated on film, sure, but it's been telecinied to a Blu-ray, or now it's been scanned and graded with all the bells and whistles to a Blu-ray. So what this target is in film emulation is actually quite a slippery slope. Of course, it's a creative industry we're in. It's not live or die, yes or no, get the answer correct, or get the answer wrong, and lives are in the balance. It's a creative industry. We're telling stories, and there's a lot of leeway. So it's fine, but it's something to bear in mind. So just a slight stake in the sand. Another way that we could maybe have some reference is these profiles. So, these are the LUTs that come with Resolve in their film looks. I've just applied 2 on here. One of the Kodak ones, this is one of the Fuji ones at, I think, the same color temperature, both at D65 white point. Now, sure, this is from a previous era. So call it like 10 to 15 years ago, the method of doing film emulation, either actually going back to film to kind of know what it would look like, or later on actually just using this for digital finish and leaving it on as the look. This was, for a long while, this was the way people graded a print emulation, using LUTs as their print and neg emulation. So these can be some guides to us, but now we're in the era of TCTLs, we're in plugins, we're in do-it-yourself, code-it-yourself, and it's a very wide and exciting realm. So with some of those look design concepts in mind, let's have a look at the Filmverse plugin. I've applied it here. I'm working in DaVinci Wide Gamut, and I'm using DaVinci Color Transform as my display rendering. Do have an overall blend which has come in, so we can, like an opacity, we can soften the look out, or you can do the node opacity. Just always bear that in mind, that if you like the look but you just want to ease it out a little bit, you always do have the choice of node opacity. In terms of 1D tone curve, we do have the mid-gray point that we can move from the starting point, and it literally is just a starting point. The Filmverse does give you a wide palette that you can move around in. In terms of where you would position highlights, it is often a important question, and you've got a threshold control here as well. And you get used to just how these various controls work. If you want harsher highlights or softer highlights as they are on the default. You also can control the shadows, so that's also a nice important thing because sometimes we want a bit of a rolled in look, almost like amateur video or badly shot or something. We want to like overdo the film thing, make it look like 8mm or 16mm. We want to roll the bottom end in a little bit. That's something that you might do there with the shadow and the shadow threshold. You can roll those in and decide how much of that you would want. And again, the mid-gray, if we want to see more into the lower end, we could drop our mid-gray point, open up like that. That's one way of doing it. Or we could say we like the setting, and then we actually might be doing a contrast tweak beforehand using primary tools prior to our node to say we're going to lower the contrast or move the pivot point, change the gamma of the signal prior to going into it. That's also a way to do it. However you want to work your way through this, that's totally fine. It's a really open playing field. In terms of the split toning, that is quite characteristic of film looks. We do have some options here, which is quite nice. So, highlight, if you like the cooler or warmer highlights, you can decide. This control is almost moving between two types of film emulation rather than a control which moves exactly across the vector scope. I'd say it's more diverse than just saying it's going from yellow to blue, the opposite. They're not necessarily opposite each other. It's more like two options and how you want to mix between those two options. For the lower end, you can also do that if you want to do a warmer low end or the cooler low end. Totally up to you. And you can also work on an intensity here, the split tone mix, how much you want to mix it in or take it out. Density is, that's a... For me, these density controls are a little bit like the salt or sugar, the spicy spice that you're going to add a bit, then add a bit more, and then add too much. And so yeah, just check it out. Obviously do what's right for the job, but you'll see that you can very think, let's push, let's go, and you realize, okay, we've gone too far. We've rammed all the sliders to one end, and now we're getting something that's very unnatural. We do have that control, and we do have a section that controls, because skin is so much of what we do is skin tone, and we might have a look that's great, a world that's great, and we need to do some isolation. So we do have that option here to either change the hue, the overall hue of that skin tone quadrant, lightness, and chroma, which is quite nice. Some of the tools that we have at our disposal. So just as a quick summary, I'd say in terms of 1D tone curve design within the plugin, we have the mid-gray, we have the S-curve intensity, and then highlight and shadow control. In terms of 1D tone curve, the choices that we have, moving the intensity, moving the mid-gray point, and then controlling fine detail about highlight and shadow. So those are kind of 1D curve concerns. Then in terms of our split toning is this section here. So from the split curve mix, the retro modern mids and highs, that's really our split tone section, those three sliders. And then this whole other broad section of HSL and Matrix, that is, this normal saturation, film saturation, the density, and you could also say that this choice of film stock, print stocks, and film stock, that is also, you're choosing another matrix if you're choosing a different film stock. So you could look at it that way. But that's a whole kind of broader level of choices that we have in these drop downs of choice of negative and choice of print. So if you are using the Filmverse plugin, give lots of feedback to Jai, and let him know your suggestions, and let him see the results, see what you've made with your footage. So that's it for this video on look design. It's a very deep topic with many aspects, so much more to discuss. And let us know in the comments and suggestions, and we can do other videos on topics that you're interested in this very wonderful world of color grading. See you next time.